The afternoon sun was low and watery, casting a weak gold light that did nothing to warm the cracked pavement of the dealership lot. Jack Miller adjusted the rearview mirror, his own eyes tired and lined, staring back at him for a moment before he glanced at the back seat. Emma sat strapped in her booster seat, humming a little song to her stuffed bear. A well-loved one-eyed creature named Liberty she held up to the window, showing him the rows of gleaming new trucks, their chrome grills catching the sunlight like a row of metal teeth. "They're so shiny, Daddy," she said, her voice full of a wonder that Jack hadn't felt in years. "Yeah, kiddo," he replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "They are." His own truck, the one that had carried them through 3 states and 4 tough years, coughed as he turned the engine off. The sound familiar. A low grumble of protest like an old dog waking from a nap. The paint was a faded blue, peeling in spots around the wheel wells where rust had begun its slow, patient work. The driver's side door had a dent from a runaway shopping cart 2 winters ago, and the whole thing smelled faintly of sawdust, pine, and the lingering sweetness of the juice box Emma had spilled last week. But it was theirs paid for, stubborn and honest in a way these polished machines would never be. He just needed a headlight bulb. The passenger side had gone out last night, and he didn't want to risk a ticket he couldn't afford. He'd tried the local parts store, but the kid behind the counter had just shrugged and said they didn't stock anything for a model that old. The dealership was his last resort, a place he avoided on principle. A place that glittered with things he could never have. As they stepped out of the truck, Jack pulled Emma's thin coat tighter around her shoulders. The wind had a bite to it, promising a cold night ahead. He took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around her small, soft ones, and they walked toward the glass doors of the showroom. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss, releasing a wave of conditioned air that smelled like new plastic and expensive air freshener. A salesman in a suit too tight for his frame looked up from his phone. His smile practiced, polished, and didn't touch his eyes. He glanced at Jack's work boots, his worn jeans, his flannel shirt. Then his gaze drifted past them to the parking lot where Jack's old truck sat among the pristine sedans and SUVs. The salesman's smile tightened into a smirk, a small, cruel thing, just for a second before he smoothed it back into place. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone dripping with a politeness that felt like an insult. Jack's hand tightened on Emma's. He straightened his shoulders and met the man's gaze. "Yeah, looking for the parts department. Need a headlight for an old Series F truck." The salesman chuckled, a short, sharp sound. "You mean that thing you parked out front?" Emma looked up at her dad, confused by the man's tone. Jack kept his eyes locked on the salesman's. "We don't carry parts for relics," he said, leaning forward slightly on his desk. "If you want my advice, do yourself a favor and trade that piece of junk in before it falls apart on the highway." The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Emma's hand squeezed his tighter. "Daddy." Jack looked down at her and forced another smile. "It's okay, sweetheart. He's just—" He didn't know how to finish that sentence. He didn't know how to explain cruelty to a child who only saw the good in things. From the corner of the showroom, a woman who had been staring out the window at a row of electric cars turned her head slowly. She wore simple jeans, a gray sweater, and her hair was tied back in a messy bun. She looked like just another customer waiting for an oil change, but her eyes were sharp, intelligent, and they were fixed on the salesman with an expression that was anything but casual. She didn't say a word, not yet, but she had heard everything, and the quiet anger that began to build inside her was more powerful than any engine on the floor. The salesman leaned back in his chair, a look of bored superiority on his face. He'd already dismissed Jack a relic with a relic truck. Not worth his commission, not worth his time. He gestured vaguely toward a hallway to his right. "Parts is down there, but I wouldn't get your hopes up. They're not going to have what you need." Jack's jaw was a hard line, a muscle ticking just beneath the skin. He could feel the familiar burn of humiliation creeping up his neck, a feeling he'd gotten used to over the years but never accepted. He'd been a carpenter for 15 years. He built things with his hands strong, honest things that lasted. He knew the value of something that was old but still worked, still held its ground. But in a place like this, a world of disposable shine and temporary perfection, his world didn't matter. He looked down at Emma, her face scrunched in confusion, her bright, hopeful eyes now clouded with the first shadow of understanding that sometimes the world wasn't kind. She didn't know why the man was being mean, but she knew he was, and she clutched her dad's hand like he was the only anchor in the room. "Come on, kiddo," Jack said, his voice low and steady. "Let's go check." He started to walk away, to follow the salesman's dismissive gesture down the hall, to face another dead end, another quiet defeat. But before he could take more than 2 steps, a voice cut through the showroom's sterile air. "Excuse me." It was calm, measured, but held a sharpness that made the salesman look up. Startled, the woman from the corner was walking toward them. She didn't look at Jack. Not yet. Her gaze was fixed entirely on the salesman, her posture relaxed, but there was an authority in the way she moved that didn't match her simple clothes. "That man is a customer," she said, her voice quiet but carrying across the polished floor. "He came here for help, not for an appraisal of his vehicle from someone who clearly doesn't know the first thing about loyalty or respect." The salesman blinked, then straightened in his chair, trying to regain his footing. "I was just offering some friendly advice, ma'am." "No, you weren't," she replied, stopping just a few feet from his desk. "You were mocking him, and you did it in front of his daughter. That's not advice. That's cruelty, and it has no place here." The salesman's face flushed a deep, blotchy red. "Who do you think you are?" he stammered. A little too loud, a little too defensive. The woman didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She just tilted her head slightly, and her eyes went cold. "I'm the person who signs your paycheck. Now get up and go find the part for his truck. And if you can't find it, you will call every other dealership in this state until you do. Am I clear?" The man's mouth opened and closed like a fish, his arrogance dissolving into pure, stunned silence. He stood up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. "Yes, Miss Richardson," he mumbled, avoiding her eyes, avoiding everyone's eyes, and scurried toward the parts department like he was escaping a fire. The woman watched him go. Then she turned to Jack, her expression softening instantly. "I'm so sorry about that," she said, her voice now gentle and full of a sincerity that caught him off guard. He just stared at her, unsure of what to say. Emma peeked out from behind his leg, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. Jack swallowed hard, trying to find his voice, but the words wouldn't come. Not yet. He had been ready for a fight, ready for the quiet shame of walking away. But he had not been ready for this, for a stranger to step into the line of fire for him, for no reason at all. The showroom, which had felt so cold and vast just moments before, now seemed to shrink around the three of them. The air was thick with the aftershock of the confrontation. The other salespeople, who had been pretending not to watch, were now very busy with paperwork, their heads bent low, their silence a testament to the power shift that had just occurred. Jack finally found his voice, though it was rougher than he intended. "You didn't have to do that," he said, looking at the woman who had just dismantled a man's ego without raising her voice. "Yes, I did," she replied simply. Her gaze was steady, direct, and held no trace of pity. Just a quiet conviction that unsettled him more than the salesman's insult had. "I'm Ellie," she said, extending a hand. Her fingers were long and slender, without any jewelry except for a thin silver ring on her thumb. Her handshake was firm, confident. Jack took her hand, his own calloused and rough from years of handling wooden tools. "Jack, and this is Emma." Emma shyly waved from behind his leg, still clutching Liberty the bear to her chest. Ellie knelt down so she was at Emma's level, a genuine smile touching her lips. "That's a very handsome bear." "Liberty is a good listener," Emma whispered, nodding seriously. "I'll bet he is," Ellie said, her eyes twinkling just a little. "You know, my grandfather had a truck a lot like your dad's. It was his favorite thing in the world. He said it had more heart than all the new ones put together." Emma's face lit up. "That's what Daddy says. He says our truck has stories." Ellie stood up. her eyes meeting Jack's again. And in that moment, he saw something beyond the quiet authority. He saw a flicker of something else, something familiar, a hint of loneliness, maybe, or the quiet weight of carrying a world on her shoulders. The salesman returned then, his face pale, his posture stooped. He was holding a small cardboard box with a faded label. He didn't look at Ellie. He looked at the floor as he handed it to Jack. "This is the last one we had in stock," he mumbled. "No charge." Jack took the box, surprised, but Ellie spoke before he could. "Thank you, Brad," she said, her voice cool and final. "Now I believe you have other customers to ignore." The salesman scurried away again, disappearing behind a row of SUVs. Jack turned the box over in his hands, still trying to process what had just happened. He had come here for a bulb and had somehow walked into the middle of a quiet war he didn't understand. "You work here?" he asked Ellie finally. Looking at her, she hesitated for a fraction of a second, just long enough for him to notice something. "Like that," she said with a shrug. "I'm new, trying to learn the ropes." Jack nodded, though he didn't quite believe her. There was nothing new or uncertain about her, but he didn't press. He was just grateful. Grateful for the part in his hand. Grateful for his daughter's smile returning. Grateful for the unexpected kindness of a stranger who felt less and less like a stranger with every passing second. Jack clutched the small box in his hand, the cardboard soft and worn at the edges. It felt heavier than a single headlight bulb. It felt like a peace offering, a quiet apology from a world that rarely gave them. He looked at Ellie, who was now talking softly to Emma about the different colors of the cars on the showroom floor, not talking down to her, but with her, with a genuine interest that made Emma chatter excitedly about her favorite color, being sky blue because it matched their truck. Jack knew he should just say thank you again and leave. He had what he came for, and he had a long drive back to the small rented house on the edge of town where a half-finished kitchen cabinet job was waiting for him. But something held him there, some unspoken current in the room that had to do with more than just a rude salesman and a free part. He cleared his throat, and Ellie looked up, her conversation with Emma pausing. "I'd like to pay for this," he said, holding up the box. "You don't have to," Ellie replied, her smile gentle but firm. "Think of it as a formal apology from the management." He hesitated, his pride a stubborn thing that didn't like handouts, even when they were deserved. "I appreciate that," he said, "but I prefer to pay my own way." Ellie studied him for a long moment, her head tilted slightly. She seemed to be weighing her words carefully. Then, "How about a trade?" she asked. Jack raised an eyebrow. "A trade?" "I noticed the logo on your jacket," she said, pointing to the small stitched image of a hammer and saw above his pocket. "You're a carpenter." He nodded once. "Best in the county, according to my mom." She smiled a real smile this time, one that lit up her face and made her look younger, less guarded. "I've got a project, an old bookshelf that needs some help. It's been sitting in my office for weeks, and I haven't had the heart to throw it out or the skill to fix it." Jack found himself smiling back. "You're asking a guy you just met to fix your furniture. That's a lot of trust to put in a stranger." "I trust a man who's loyal to an old truck," she said, her gaze flicking toward the window where his faded blue pickup sat like a sleeping giant. "And besides," she added, her voice dropping a little, "I have a feeling you're the kind of person who knows how to fix things that are broken." Jack held her gaze, and for the first time since he'd walked into this polished, cold place, he felt seen not as a charity case, not as a man down on his luck, but as a craftsman, as a father, as someone whose hands could build things that lasted. "Okay," he said, the word feeling more significant than it should have. "It's a deal." He didn't have a business card, so he took a napkin from a nearby water cooler and wrote his number on it with a pencil he borrowed from Emma's pocket. His handwriting was strong and clear, the lines straight and sure, just like the cuts he made in wood. He handed it to her, their fingers brushing for a brief moment. The touch was light, accidental, but it sent a small jolt of warmth through him that had nothing to do with the showroom's heating system. "Thanks," he said again. And this time, he meant it for everything. She took the napkin and folded it carefully, tucking it into the pocket of her jeans. He turned to go, but Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Are we going to see the bookshelf lady again?" she whispered loudly enough for Ellie to hear. Jack looked at Ellie, a question in his eyes. Ellie knelt down again and winked at Emma. "I hope so," she said. "I'll call your dad tomorrow, and we'll set it up." Emma beamed and hugged Liberty the bear tightly. Good Liberty likes her. He has good taste. As they walked out, the doors sliding open to let the cold afternoon air rush in, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he had just agreed to something much bigger than fixing a piece of furniture. He had a feeling he had just agreed to let someone in, and that was a feeling he hadn't had in a very long time. The drive home was different. The truck's engine still rumbled its familiar complaint, and the wind still whistled through the crack in the passenger window. But the silence inside wasn't as heavy as it had been on the way there. Emma chattered in the back seat, telling Liberty all about the shiny cars and the mean man and the nice lady who knew that old trucks had stories. Jack listened with half an ear, his thoughts circling back to Ellie, her calm voice, her steady eyes, the way she had commanded the room without raising a single decibel. He pulled into the gravel driveway of their small rental house, a simple two-bedroom place with peeling paint and a porch that sagged a little on one side. It wasn't much, but it was home. It was where he'd taught Emma to ride a bike, where they had movie nights with popcorn on the living room floor, where the ghosts of his late wife felt more like gentle whispers than heavy chains. He spent the rest of the afternoon in his workshop, a converted garage at the back of the property. The air inside smelled of cedar and sawdust, a scent that always calmed him. He worked on the set of kitchen cabinets he was building for a client, his hands moving with the practiced ease of a man who knew his craft. He measured twice, cut once, his focus sharp, his movements precise. But every so often, his mind would drift back to the dealership, to the woman with the kind eyes and the hidden strength. Who was she really, not just a new employee? He was sure of that. There was too much power held in reserve, too much confidence in her stillness. He tried to brush it off, telling himself it didn't matter. She was a client now, nothing more. He had a bookshelf to fix, a job to do. That was all. But as he ran his hand over the smooth grain of a freshly sanded piece of oak, he thought of her words, "I trust a man who's loyal to an old truck." He hadn't felt that kind of respect from a stranger in years. Most people just saw the rust, the dents, the age. They didn't see the heart. She had. He finished his work for the day as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He went inside, made dinner for him and Emma spaghetti with sauce from a jar, his late wife's recipe with extra basil and a pinch of sugar, and they ate at the small kitchen table, talking about their day. Emma drew a picture of Ellie with a crayon, a stick figure with a big smile and a speech bubble that said, "You're nice." Jack taped it to the fridge next to a picture of his wife, that night, after Emma was asleep. Jack sat on the sagging porch step, staring out at the dark silhouette of his truck. The new headlight glowed brightly, a single star in the darkness. He pulled out his phone and looked at it, wondering if she would actually call. He told himself it didn't matter, but he knew he was lying. He hadn't realized how much he'd been hoping for a sign that he wasn't alone in the world until one had walked right up to him in the middle of a car dealership and offered him a trade. He had no idea what he was trading for, but for the first time in a long time, he was willing to find out. The phone rang at 10 the next morning, the sound cutting through the high-pitched whine of Jack's table saw. He shut the machine down, wiping sawdust from his hands as he walked over to the workbench, where his phone was propped against a jar of screws. He didn't recognize the number, but his heart gave a small jolt of anticipation. "Miller," he answered, his voice a little rough from the dust. "Hey," she said, "it's Ellie." The sound of her voice was just as calm and clear as he remembered, even through the phone's tiny speaker. He leaned against the workbench, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I was wondering if you'd call," he said. She chuckled softly. "I told you I would. I'm a woman of my word." "So am I," Jack replied. which means I have a bookshelf to fix. Is now a bad time to talk about it? No, now is perfect, she said. So tell me about this project. What kind of wood is it? What's wrong with it? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then she said, You know, you're the first person who's asked about the wood. Everyone else would just ask how much it would cost to replace it. Jack shrugged, even though she couldn't see him. It matters. The wood has a story, just like a truck. He could almost hear her smile. It's oak, she said. Old, dark, heavy. It was my grandfather's. One of the legs is split, and a couple of the shelves are warped. I think it just needs someone who knows what they're doing. He made a few notes on a scrap piece of wood, his mind already working through the problem. I can do that, he said. When would be a good time for me to take a look? She hesitated for a moment, then said, How about tomorrow afternoon I can text you the address? I'll be there, Jack said, feeling a sense of purpose that went beyond a simple repair job. Good, she said, and this time he was the one who could feel the smile in his voice. And I'll have coffee ready unless you'd prefer something else. Coffee's good, he said, after they hung up. Jack stood in his workshop for a long moment, the scent of sawdust and fresh-cut pine filling the air. He looked around at the tools of his trade, the stacks of lumber, the half-finished projects, all things he could control, things he understood. This Ellie, this bookshelf, this feeling of quiet anticipation, it was something else entirely. Something he couldn't measure or cut or sand into submission. It was a different kind of project, a different kind of build. And for the first time in a long time, he was looking forward to seeing how it would turn out. He felt a flicker of something he hadn't let himself feel for years, a small, dangerous spark of hope. The address Ellie texted him wasn't a house. It was an office building, a sleek glass and steel structure that rose from the heart of the city's financial district. It was the kind of place with a lobby that was bigger than Jack's entire house, with marble floors that echoed with the click of expensive shoes and a front desk manned by a woman with a headset and an impossibly perfect smile. Jack stood in the entrance for a moment, his work boots feeling heavy and out of place on the polished stone. He clutched his old canvas tool bag, his knuckles white. He had dressed in his cleanest pair of jeans and a dark blue button-down shirt, but he still felt like a man who had wandered into the wrong story. He approached the front desk, his reflection a distorted figure in the chrome of the counter. "Can I help you, sir?" the woman asked, her voice professionally cheerful. "Yeah, I'm here to see Ellie," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Her last name is... He realized with a jolt that he didn't know it. He had her number, he had this address, but he didn't have her last name. The woman's smile didn't falter. "One moment, please." She typed something into her computer, her perfectly manicured nails clicking softly on the keyboard. Then she looked up, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. There is no one named Ellie registered in the building. Do you have a company name?" Jack's stomach sank. Of course, he should have asked. He should have known it wasn't going to be this simple. He was about to turn around, to text Ellie and admit he was lost, when a voice called his name. "Jack." He looked up and saw her standing at the far end of the lobby, near a bank of elevators. She was waving at him, a small, relieved smile on her face. Today she was dressed differently, a simple black dress that fell to her knees and a pair of flat shoes. She looked elegant, professional, but her eyes were the same, kind and steady as they had been in the showroom. She walked toward him, her steps quick and sure. "Sorry," she said as she reached him. "I should have met you downstairs. I forgot how much they guard this place like a fortress." "It's all right," he said, feeling a rush of relief so strong it almost made him dizzy. She turned to the woman at the desk. "He's with me. Paige." "Thanks." Paige nodded, her professional smile returning as she buzzed them through a set of glass doors. Ellie led him down a long, quiet hallway lined with framed prints of abstract art. The air was cool and smelled faintly of paper and success. "This is a long way to come for a bookshelf," he said, his voice a little rough. She glanced at him, a wry smile on her lips. "I told you it was a special bookshelf." They stopped in front of a heavy wooden door with a small silver plaque on it. It read Richardson Enterprises. Jack looked at the name, then at her. Eleanor Richardson. He said it out loud. More a statement than a question. She winced just a little. I know, I should have told you. I'm sorry, I just wanted to be Ellie for a little while. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at her. This woman of two worlds, the one who stood up for him in a dealership, and the one whose name was etched in silver on a door in a skyscraper. He should have been intimidated. He should have felt a new wall go up between them. But strangely, he didn't. All he felt was the same quiet pull he'd felt from the beginning. Come on, she said, pushing the door open. Let me show you what you're up against. The office was even more impressive than the lobby. One entire wall was a floor-to-ceiling window offering a breathtaking panoramic view of the city below. A large mahogany desk sat in the center, clean and organized. And in the corner, bathed in the afternoon light, stood the bookshelf. It was just as she'd described it, old, dark oak with intricate carvings along the top and sides. It was a beautiful piece of furniture, a relic from another time, much like his truck. But she was right. It was in bad shape. One of the front legs was split clean through, held together by a prayer and the sheer stubbornness of the wood. The shelves sagged in the middle, bowed under the invisible weight of years. Jack set his tool bag down and walked over to it, running his hand along the warped wood. He crouched down to examine the broken leg, his fingers tracing the split with the gentle touch of a surgeon. This isn't just a bookshelf, he said, his voice full of a quiet reverence. This is a piece of history. It was my grandfather's, she said, her voice soft. She stood a few feet behind him, watching him work. He built the first dealership with his own two hands. He kept all his first ledgers on the shelf. He said it reminded him where he came from. Jack looked up at her. Her professional armor seemed to have slipped away. In here, in front of this piece of her past. She wasn't Eleanor Richardson, CEO. She was just a granddaughter trying to hold on to a memory. He's the one who had the truck, he said, making the connection. She nodded, a small, sad smile on her lips. He loved that thing more than the fancy cars he started selling. He'd take me for rides on Sunday afternoons. Just the two of us. Jack stood up, wiping a speck of dust from his jeans. I can fix it, he said. It wasn't a boast, it was a promise. It'll take some time. I'll need to take the leg back to my shop to mend it properly. But I can make it strong again, as strong as it was when your grandfather first built it. Her eyes shimmered with a gratitude that went far beyond a simple repair. Thank you, Jack, she whispered. I knew you could. He spent the next hour carefully disassembling the broken leg. Working with a quiet focus that shut out the world around him, Ellie sat in the chair by her desk, pretending to work on her computer, but he knew she was watching him. She didn't interrupt. She didn't hover. She just let him work, creating a small pocket of workshop silence in the middle of her corporate world. When he was finally ready to leave, he wrapped the broken leg carefully in a canvas cloth, like he was swaddling a child. You'll have it back by the end of the week, he said, turning to her. I trust you, she replied. And the way she said it, the simple, unwavering belief in his ability to make something whole again, was worth more than any payment he could have asked for. He was halfway to the door when she called his name. Jack! He turned. Yes. Stay for a minute, she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Let me buy you that coffee I promised. Jack hesitated for a moment, then nodded and sat down. The pretense of a simple repair job had fallen away, and they both knew that this was about something more. It had been from the start. The coffee she brought him was from a sleek silver machine that hissed and whirred with quiet efficiency. It tasted rich and strong. Nothing like the burnt diner coffee he was used to. He held the small ceramic cup in his calloused hands, feeling the warmth seep into his skin. Ellie sat across from him at the large desk, her own cup untouched. She had shed the professional mask she wore in the lobby, and now she just looked tired. Her shoulders slumped slightly, her eyes holding a familiar weariness that Jack recognized all too well. So, Richardson Enterprises, he said, gesturing vaguely at the room. That's a big name for a big office. She gave a faint smile. It's my father's company. Or it was. He passed it to me when he retired. I'm just trying not to run it into the ground. Jack took a sip of the coffee. You don't seem like the type to run anything into the ground. You seem like the type who fixes things. She looked up, surprised by his observation. Maybe, she said, her voice quiet. Or maybe I'm just good at hiding the cracks. He studied her for a moment, seeing past the expensive dress and the corner office to the woman who had stood up for him in a showroom full of strangers. You're not hiding them from me, he said softly. Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, she looked completely vulnerable. What do you see? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. He leaned forward slightly, setting his cup down on the polished wood. I see someone who's loyal to the people and things that matter to her, like her grandfather and his bookshelf. I see someone who isn't afraid to get her hands dirty, even if she doesn't know what she's doing. And I see someone who's carrying a weight that's too heavy to carry alone. Her breath caught in her throat. No one had ever looked at her and seen that. They saw the name, the money, the power. They didn't see the person underneath, holding it all together. How do you do that? She asked. How do you see all that? He shrugged. I spend my life working with wood. Wood doesn't lie. You can see the stress points, the weak spots, the places where it's been bent but hasn't broken. You just have to know how to look. She stared at him, a slow tear tracing a path down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, but not before he saw it. I haven't cried in this office in 5 years, she said with a shaky laugh. Then maybe it's about time someone made you feel something real in here, he said. And the space between them filled with a quiet understanding that was more intimate than any touch they could have shared. They talked for another hour, not about business or bookshelves, but about everything else, about growing up in small towns and big cities, about the smell of sawdust and the quiet hum of a city at night, about losing parents and trying to raise children who still believed in magic. He told her about his wife, about the hole she'd left that never quite filled in, and she told him about the crushing loneliness of being surrounded by people who only wanted something from her. By the time he left, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the city. The bookshelf leg was tucked safely in his bag, and a quiet promise hung in the air between them. This wasn't just about fixing something old. It was about building something new. Jack spent the next 3 days in his workshop. Consumed by the bookshelf leg, it became more than just a job. It was a puzzle, a challenge, a conversation with a craftsman from another era. He worked with a meticulous care that bordered on obsession. He carefully cleaned the split wood, gently sanding away the splintered edges. He mixed his own wood glue, a special blend he used for delicate antique repairs. He clamped the leg together with a series of custom-made jigs, applying pressure slowly and evenly, allowing the two halves to become one again, while the glue cured. He studied the rest of the leg's construction, the hand-carved details, the subtle imperfections that spoke of a human touch. He found a small carving on the underside of the foot, a tiny, almost invisible set of initials, G.R. His hands were covered in sawdust and stained by the end of each day, but he felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. This was his world, a world of tangible things, of problems he could solve with skill and patience. Emma would come out to the workshop after school, peeking around the doorframe to watch him work. "What are you making, Daddy?" she'd ask, her eyes wide with curiosity. "I'm fixing a memory," he'd reply without looking up. On the third day, as he was applying the final coat of varnish to the repaired leg, his phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Ellie. It was a photo of a half-eaten sandwich on a paper plate, sitting on her massive mahogany desk. The caption read, "My sad desk lunch. Thinking of your workshop and the smell of real wood?" He smiled and texted back, "Almost done. Just letting the story settle in." She replied instantly with a single word, "Good." That simple exchange of photo and a few words felt more significant than any of the formal emails and meetings that probably filled her day. He let the varnish dry for a full 24 hours. Then he carefully wrapped the finished leg in a soft, clean cloth. It was strong again, seamless. The split was gone, replaced by a line so faint you'd have to know it was there to see it. It was whole again. He felt a sense of pride that was deep and satisfying, but it was tangled with something else, a strange sense of loss. He had fixed her grandfather's bookshelf, but he wasn't sure what to do about the quiet space that had opened up in his own life since he'd met her. He had poured all his focus into this one piece of wood, and now that it was done, he was left with the silence and the unsettling question of what came next. He called her on Friday morning to tell her the leg was ready. Her voice was bright with a relief that she didn't try to hide. "That's amazing. Jack, thank you. When can you bring it back?" "How about this afternoon?" he suggested. "I can reattach it and make sure the whole shelf is level." She agreed instantly and then added with a slight hesitation, "And maybe you and Emma could stay for dinner afterward, I mean. If you're not busy, I'll order in something good. Not sad desk sandwiches." Jack paused for a moment, a warmth spreading through his chest. "Emma would love that," he said. "Then it's a date," she replied, her voice soft and full of a hope that matched his own. Jack arrived at Ellie's office building late that afternoon, with the repaired bookshelf leg carefully wrapped in his tool bag and Emma skipping excitedly beside him. This time, the woman at the front desk, Paige, smiled warmly and buzzed them through without a word. She even gave Emma a lollipop, which Emma accepted with the solemn gravity of a diplomat receiving a state gift. When they reached Ellie's office, she was waiting at the door. She was dressed in jeans again and a soft blue sweater, the same color as his truck. Her hair was down, and she looked more like the woman from the dealership than the CEO of Richardson Enterprises. "Wow," she said as he unwrapped the leg, her fingers tracing the repaired seam, her eyes wide with genuine awe. "You're a miracle worker. You can't even tell it was broken." "I told you I could fix it," he said with a quiet smile. "Now let's make this thing whole again." He spent the next hour reassembling the bookshelf, his movements efficient and sure. Emma sat on the floor nearby, drawing a picture of the city skyline with a set of new markers Ellie had waiting for her. Ellie didn't hover. She just sat in her armchair, watching him with a quiet intensity, as if the act of him mending this piece of her family's history was somehow mending something in her too. When he was finished, he stepped back and wiped his hands on a rag. The bookshelf stood tall and proud, its shelves level, its legs strong, its dark wood glowing in the afternoon light. It looked like it could stand for another 100 years. "It's perfect," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Jack. Really?" He just nodded, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with money. Just then, a delivery man arrived with 3 large bags of food, the smell of garlic and herbs filling the office. Ellie spread the feast out on her large desk, turning the symbol of her corporate power into a makeshift family dinner table. They ate from paper containers with plastic forks, laughing as Emma recounted a dramatic story about a squirrel in their backyard. It was a strange and beautiful scene, a carpenter, a CEO, and a little girl sharing a meal in a skyscraper office, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the quiet promise of a future they were just beginning to build. After dinner, as the city lights began to twinkle to life outside the massive window, Emma fell asleep on the plush office couch, her head pillowed on Liberty the bear, her half-finished drawing of the skyline resting on her chest. The remnants of their meal were packed away, and a comfortable silence settled between Jack and Ellie. He stood by the window, looking out at the sprawling metropolis, a universe away from his quiet workshop. She stood beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her shoulder brushing against his. "You know," he said, his voice low, "my wife always wanted to see a view like this. She loved the way cities looked at night, like fallen constellations." He hadn't talked about his wife to a stranger in years, but with Ellie, it didn't feel strange. It felt right. "She must have been very special," Ellie said softly. "She was," Jack replied, a sad smile touching his lips. "She was the one who convinced me to start my own business. She believed in me more than I believed in myself." He turned to look at Ellie, her face soft in the dim light, her eyes full of a deep empathy that needed no words. "I see that same belief in you," she said quietly. He blinked, surprised. "What do you mean?" "I see it in the way you care for Emma, in the way you brought my grandfather's bookshelf back to life. You don't just fix things, Jack. You honor them." She reached out, and her hand rested on his arm. Her touch was light, but it sent a current of warmth straight to his heart. "I haven't felt this seen by anyone in a very long time," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Me neither," she whispered, her eyes locked on his. "You walked up to my dealership looking for a part, and I think I'm the one who found what was missing." He didn't know what to say to that, so he didn't say anything at all. He just leaned in slowly, closing the small space between them, and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of passion or demand. It was a kiss of recognition, a quiet acknowledgement of two lonely souls finding a flicker of light in each other's darkness. It was gentle and slow and full of all the words they hadn't said yet when they pulled apart. The city lights blurred behind her like 1,000 tiny promises, and for the first time in a very long time, Jack felt like he was standing on solid ground. The weeks that followed were a blur of quiet discovery and cautious hope. They fell into a rhythm that was both new and strangely familiar. During the week, Jack would work in his shop, the scent of sawdust his constant companion, while Ellie navigated the world of boardrooms and balance sheets. But their evenings and weekends became their own shared territory, a space they carved out of their two disparate worlds. She would come to his small rental house, not as a CEO, but as Ellie, bringing groceries or a new book for Emma. She learned to love the smell of his workshop, and he learned to not be intimidated by the view from her office. They would cook dinner together in his cramped kitchen, their shoulders brushing as they moved around each other, laughing when they inevitably burned the garlic bread. Emma adored her. Ellie would listen to her stories for hours, helping her with homework and teaching her how to fold a paper airplane that could actually fly. One Saturday, they all went to the park and flew a kite Jack had made from scrap wood and canvas. It soared high above them, a tiny speck against the vast blue sky. And as they stood there, heads tilted back, Emma sandwiched between them, holding both of their hands, Jack felt a sense of peace so profound it almost scared him. He wasn't just a single father struggling to get by anymore. He was a man building a life, a family, a future. But there was always a quiet hum of reality beneath the surface, a reminder of the chasm between their lives. He was a carpenter who lived paycheck to paycheck. She was a woman who owned skyscrapers. He tried not to think about it, but it was always there, a shadow at the edge of their sunny afternoons. One evening, as they were sitting on his porch, watching the fireflies begin their nightly dance, a sleek black car pulled up in front of the house. A man in a sharp suit got out and walked up the path, holding a leather briefcase. Ellie's face tensed the moment she saw him, her easy smile vanishing. "Who's that?" Jack asked, his voice low. "That's my company's lawyer," she said, her own voice tight and guarded. "And he doesn't make house calls unless it's important." The lawyer, a man with a stern face and cold eyes, nodded curtly at Jack before turning to Ellie. "Miss Richardson," he said, "we have a problem, a big one. The media got a tip. There's a reporter sniffing around, asking questions about you, and a local contractor." The words hung in the air like a death sentence to the quiet world they had built. Jack's heart sank. He looked at Ellie and saw the fear in her eyes, a fear that mirrored his own. Their two worlds had just collided, and he had a feeling the crash was going to be bigger than either of them could handle. The lawyer, Mr. Henderson, didn't bother with pleasantries. He opened his briefcase on the rickety porch table and spread out a series of documents, his movements sharp, precise, and utterly devoid of emotion. "Someone from the dealership sales team leaked it," he said, his voice a low monotone. "Brad Mitchell, the salesman you disciplined. He sold the story to a tabloid, a disgruntled employee looking for a payday. They've been following you for a week." He pushed forward several grainy photographs. "Ms. Richardson taking dinner at this house, at the park with the child, all of it." Jack felt like he'd been sucker punched. The photos showed private moments, him and Ellie cooking in his kitchen, the three of them at Willow Creek Park flying the handmade kite, Emma sitting on Ellie's lap reading a book on the porch. Moments that had felt sacred, now reduced to black and white surveillance, laid out on his weathered porch table like evidence of a crime. Ellie's face was pale in the dim porch light. "What are they saying?" "The story they're running with is the classic one," Henderson said without a hint of irony. "Billionaire heiress finds solace in the arms of a simple working-class man. It's a narrative they can sell, a fairy tale with a dark twist. They're framing you, Mr. Miller, as her pet project, her charity case." Jack felt the blood drain from his face. The words hit him like a physical blow. He looked down at his hands, his calloused knuckles, and suddenly felt the full weight of the world's judgment. He wasn't just a carpenter anymore. He was a character in a story he didn't write, a stereotype, a punchline. "I can kill the story," Ellie said, her voice regaining some of its steel. "I'll call my PR team. I'll threaten to sue." "It's too late for that," Henderson replied, shaking his head. "The story is already online. It'll be in print by morning. My job is damage control. We need to issue a statement. Deny the romantic aspect. Frame your relationship as a professional one. You hired him for a project. That's all. He's a contractor, not a partner." Ellie stood up, her eyes flashing with a fire Jack hadn't seen before. "Absolutely not. I will not reduce him or what we have to a press release and a lie." "Then you need to be prepared for the fallout," Henderson said, closing his briefcase with a sharp snap. "This will affect the company's stock. It will affect your reputation, and it will shine a very bright and unflattering light on your personal life and his." After the lawyer left, a heavy silence descended on the porch, the kind of silence that feels like a wall. Jack couldn't look at Ellie. He just stared out at the dark street where the lawyer's car had disappeared. "So that's it," he said, his voice hollow. "I'm your charity case. That's what the world is going to see." "You know that's not true," Ellie said, stepping closer to him, her voice pleading. "Jack, it doesn't matter what I know. It matters what they'll say, what they'll write, what people will whisper when I walk down the street." He finally looked at her, his eyes full of a pain that was deep and old. "I've spent my whole life fighting to have dignity, to be seen as more than just a guy with a hammer in his hand, and now I'm going to be a headline, a footnote in your story. I never wanted this. Jack, I never wanted to bring this chaos into your life, or Emma's." "I know you didn't," he said, his voice cracking. "But you did, and I don't know how we come back from this." He stood up and walked to the edge of the porch, his back to her. He felt like he was suffocating, trapped between the woman he was falling for and the world that would never let them be. He had built a small, safe world for his daughter, and now the walls were crashing down, and he didn't know how to stop it. 3. The morning was worse than Jack could have imagined. His phone started buzzing before sunrise with notifications from news apps he didn't even know he had. The headline was everywhere. A picture of him and Ellie at the park with Emma, taken from a distance with a long lens. Grainy and invasive. "Richardson heiress slums it with local handyman. Is he her new fixer-upper?" He felt sick. He didn't read the article. He didn't have to. He could imagine every word, every condescending phrase, every carefully crafted insinuation. He turned off his phone and tried to pretend it was a normal day. He made Emma pancakes for breakfast, her favorite, but the silence in the kitchen was thick with unspoken tension. Emma knew something was wrong. She was quieter than usual, her eyes darting to his face as if looking for clues. When he dropped her off at school, he saw the other parents whispering, their glances sliding away when he caught their eye. He felt like he was wearing a sign, a neon arrow pointing to the man who was in over his head. He went to the lumber yard to pick up supplies, and the man behind the counter, a guy he'd known for years, gave him a sympathetic look. "Hey, Jack, saw you in the news," he said, his voice low. "That's rough. Man." Jack just nodded, paid for his wood, and left without another word. The shame was a physical thing, a weight in his chest that made it hard to breathe. He went back to his workshop and tried to lose himself in his work, but the scent of sawdust couldn't block out the noise in his head. He kept seeing the headline, the picture, his life reduced to a caricature. He had always been proud of who he was, a craftsman, a father, a man who stood on his own 2 feet. Now the world was telling him he was nothing more than a project, a temporary distraction for a lonely billionaire. He heard a car pull up outside, but he didn't look up. He knew it was her, Ellie. He heard her footsteps on the gravel path, then the soft creak of the workshop door opening. "Jack," she said, her voice quiet. He kept his back to her, sanding a piece of wood with a furious intensity. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice flat. "It's not safe for you here anymore. The reporters will be back." "I don't care about the reporters. I care about you," she said. Stepping further into the workshop, he finally stopped sanding and turned to face her. His eyes were hardened. "There's nothing to care about," he said. The words were a lie, and they both knew it. "This whole thing was a mistake. I never should have let you in." Ellie took a step closer, her own eyes filling with tears. "That's not true, Jack, and you know it. Please don't do this. Don't let them win. Don't let them break what we're building." "It's already broken," he said, his voice breaking. "And I'm the one who has to live with the pieces." He turned back to his work, his message clear. He was shutting the door, and he didn't know if he had the strength to ever open it again. Ellie stood frozen in the middle of the workshop, the scent of sawdust and his quiet rejection hanging in the air like a shroud. She watched his back, the rigid line of his shoulders, the way his hands moved over the wood with a desperate focus. It was a wall he was building, a wall between them, and she knew she couldn't break it down with words. Not now. "I won't let them define us," she said, her voice a fierce whisper. "Even if you do." He didn't respond. He just kept sanding, the rhythmic scrape of the sandpaper the only sound in the room. She waited for another long moment, hoping he would turn around, hoping he would say something. Anything. But he didn't. A single tear escaped and traced a silent path down her cheek. She wiped it away with the back of her hand, turned, and walked out of the workshop. The door creaked shut behind her, leaving Jack alone with the ghosts of what could have been. She got in her car and drove away. Not back to her office, not back to her world of glass and steel, but to the one place that felt like it held an answer, the dealership. The showroom was quiet when she walked in, the salespeople looking up, startled, their polite smiles faltering when they saw the look on her face. She walked straight to the office of the general manager, a man she had hired herself, and closed the door behind her. "Find the person who leaked the story," she said, her voice low and cold. "I want their name, and I want them gone by the end of the day." Then she sat down at the empty desk and put her head in her hands. She had spent her life running a company built on her family's name, on strength, on control, but now she felt powerless. She had found something real, something honest, something that made her feel more like herself than she ever had, and she had inadvertently destroyed it with the very power she had tried to leave behind. The days that followed were a long, slow ache for Jack. He moved through his life like a ghost, going through the motions without feeling any of it. He finished the cabinet job for his client, his work as precise and perfect as ever, but there was no joy in it, just the dull satisfaction of a task completed. He took Emma to the park. He read her bedtime stories. He made her dinner. But the laughter in their small house was gone, replaced by a quiet watchfulness. Emma knew her dad was sad, and she didn't know how to fix it. He stopped answering his phone. He ignored the texts from friends asking if he was okay. He just retreated into the quiet solitude of his workshop, trying to sand away the feeling of her absence. But it lingered in the air like the scent of varnish long after it had dried. He would find himself staring at the spot where she had stood, the memory of her tears a fresh wound in his heart. He told himself he had done the right thing. He had protected Emma. He had protected his own fragile pride. He had cut the cord before the world could do it for him. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a surrender. One night, he was looking at the pictures on the fridge, and his eyes landed on the crayon drawing Emma had made of Ellie the stick figure with the big smile. It was still there, tucked between a grocery list and a photo of his wife. He reached out, and his fingers brushed against the paper, and a wave of regret so powerful it buckled his knees washed over him. What had he done? He had pushed away the one person who had seen him, who had seen past the rust and the sawdust and the struggle, and seen a man worth knowing. He had let fear and pride build a wall so high he couldn't see over it anymore. He sank into a kitchen chair and buried his face in his hands. The silence of the house pressed in on him, and he finally admitted the truth to himself. He hadn't just lost a woman he was falling for, he had lost a part of himself too. The part that had started to believe in second chances. He hadn't just been protecting his world, he had been shrinking it until there was nothing left but him and the quiet, lonely ache of what he had thrown away. Ellie didn't return to her skyscraper office. She couldn't. The silence of that place, the panoramic view of a city that felt so empty now, was more than she could bear. Instead, she drove to her grandfather's old house, a place she hadn't visited in years, a small cottage by a lake that had been left to her in his will. The house was dusty, the air inside still in smelling of old books and dried lavender. She spent her days there alone, walking by the lake, watching the way the light changed on the water, trying to quiet the noise in her head. She had done what she said she would. The employee who leaked the story was fired. The PR team had drafted a dozen different statements, but she hadn't approved any of them. What was the point? Words couldn't undo the damage. They couldn't erase the look in Jack's eyes, the look of a proud man who had been made to feel small. She had called Emma's school and made a quiet, anonymous donation to their arts program, enough to fund it for the next 5 years. She had set up a fund at a local community bank to offer low-interest loans to small business owners and tradespeople in Jackstown. She was using her power not to fight but to build, to create pockets of good in the world he inhabited. But it all felt hollow because he wasn't there to see it. One afternoon, she was cleaning out her grandfather's old desk and found a box of his letters tucked away in the back. She sat on the floor and read them for hours, letters to his wife, to his friends, to his son, her father. They were full of stories about the early days of the dealership, about his struggles and his triumphs, about his old truck and the freedom it represented. In one letter to his wife, he wrote, "They all tell me to buy a new truck, a fancier one, something that fits my new station in life, but they don't understand. This truck and we've been through it all. It doesn't just carry my tools, it carries my story. I look at it and I remember who I am." Ellie closed her eyes, the words a balm on her raw heart. Her grandfather had understood. He had known that a person's worth wasn't in what they owned, but in what they held on to, what they valued, what they loved. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the calm water, a new resolve hardening inside her. Jack had pushed her away because he thought their worlds were too different. He thought her world would swallow his. But what if he was wrong? What if her world needed his more than he could ever imagine? What if she could use her power not to change him, but to meet him where he was? She wasn't going to let their story end with a tabloid headline and a closed workshop door. She was going to write a new ending, one built on respect and understanding, and the stubborn belief that love was stronger than the noise of the world. She just had to figure out how to show him that, without using words he wouldn't believe. It was a Tuesday morning when the letter arrived for Jack, tucked into his mailbox between a flyer for a pizza place and a bill he wasn't sure how he was going to pay. The envelope was made of thick cream-colored paper, and his name was written on the front in elegant, looping handwriting. He knew who it was from before he even opened it. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird beating its wings against a cage. He took it into his workshop and sat down on his workbench, his hands trembling so slightly he had to set the letter down for a moment before he could open it. Inside was not a letter but a single sheet of paper, a high-quality print of a photograph. It was a picture of an old truck, a faded blue Series F truck with a dent on the driver's side door and rust around the wheel wells, his truck. Below the picture was a single line of text, printed in a simple, clean font. A story is not defined by its cover. It's defined by its heart. That was all. There was no signature, no plea, no explanation, just that one sentence and that one picture. He stared at it for a long time, his throat tight with a mix of emotions he couldn't name: regret, hope, sorrow, and a deep, aching love. He turned the photograph over, and on the back, in the same elegant handwriting as the envelope, was a short note. I'm at my grandfather's cottage by Silver Pine Lake. I'll be here until Friday. If you want to talk. If you don't, I'll understand. I won't bother you again. Just know that I see you. Jack, I see your heart. Jack read the note 3 times. Then he stood up and walked to the door of his workshop, looking out at the real truck sitting in his driveway. It looked tired and old and stubborn. Just like him, he had been so focused on the rust, on the dents, on the way the world saw it, that he had forgotten what Ellie had seen from the very beginning. He had forgotten that she had seen its heart, and his. He went back inside the workshop and picked up the phone. He called Emma's school and told them she wouldn't be in for the next 2 days. Then he called the client whose cabinets he was supposed to deliver and told them he had a family emergency. He packed a small bag for him and Emma, threw his toolbox in the back of the truck just in case, and wrote a quick note for the mailman to hold their mail. He didn't know what he was going to say to her. He didn't know if they could fix what was broken. But he knew he had to try. He had to show her that he saw her heart too. He buckled Emma into her seat, and she looked at him with wide, curious eyes. Where are we going? Daddy. He looked at her, a real smile touching his lips for the first time in weeks. We're going to fix a story. Kiddo, he said, and as he turned the key in the ignition, the old truck rumbled to life, ready for one more journey. The drive to Silver Pine Lake took 3 hours, a journey through winding country roads and small towns that all seemed to be sleeping in the autumn sun. Emma chattered in the back seat, excited for the adventure, her questions a constant stream of curious energy. Is it a real lake? Can we skip stones? Will the bookshelf lady be there? Jack answered each question with a patience he hadn't felt in weeks. The heavy weight in his chest had been replaced by a nervous fluttering, a mixture of fear and hope that was both terrifying and exhilarating. He followed the directions Ellie had texted him after he'd called to say he was coming. Turning down a narrow gravel road that was almost hidden by overgrown trees, the road ended at a small clearing, and there it was, a simple cottage with a stone chimney and a wide porch that overlooked the glittering expanse of the lake. It was quiet, peaceful, a world away from the city and the noise that had torn them apart. Ellie was sitting on the porch steps, a mug cradled in her hands. She stood up when she saw his truck pull in, her posture a mixture of relief and apprehension. He turned off the engine, and the silence of the woods rushed in to fill the space. Emma was out of the truck in a flash, running toward the porch with Liberty the bear clutched in her hand. We came to fix the story, she yelled, her voice echoing in the still air. Ellie knelt down and caught her in a hug, burying her face in Emma's hair, a small sob escaping her lips. Jack got out of the truck more slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. He walked toward the porch, his heart in his throat. He stopped a few feet from where she knelt with his daughter, her eyes red-rimmed and full of a vulnerable hope that stole his breath. I'm sorry, he said, his voice rough. I was scared. I let my pride and my fear get in the way. I was so worried about what the world would think of me that I forgot to think about what I would be without you. Ellie stood up, her hand still resting on Emma's shoulder. I was scared too, she said. I didn't know how to be in your world without breaking it. I didn't realize that by trying to protect you. I was just hiding who I really was. He took a step closer, bridging the gap between them. I don't want you to hide, he said. I want you, all of you, the CEO, the granddaughter, the woman who stands up for a stranger in a dealership. I don't care about the headlines. I care about this. She reached out, and her fingers brushed against his cheek, her touch a question and an answer all at once. So what do we do now? She whispered. We build something new, he said, taking her hand in his. Something strong enough to stand up to the noise. Something that has heart. She smiled a tearful, brilliant smile that made the whole world feel brighter. Yeah, she said, something with heart. Emma looked up at them, her head tilting from one to the other. Can we build a boat too? Jack laughed, a real, genuine laugh that seemed to shake the dust from his soul. I think we can do that. Kiddo, I think we can do anything now. And as the three of them stood there on the porch of the old cottage, with the lake shimmering behind them and the future stretching out before them, they weren't a carpenter and a CEO. They were just a family, a messy, imperfect, and beautiful family, finally ready to start building their own story together. They spent the next 2 days at the cottage in a bubble of quiet peace, a world away from tabloids and timelines. It was a time of healing, of rediscovering the simple rhythm they had lost. Jack fixed the squeaky hinge on the cottage's front door and repaired a loose floorboard on the porch, his hands finding solace in the familiar work of mending what was broken. Ellie showed him the letters from her grandfather, and he read them with a quiet reverence, feeling like he was getting to know the man who had built the bookshelf he now understood so well. They cooked their meals together in the small, rustic kitchen, laughing when they burned the toast and arguing playfully over how much salt to put in the soup. Emma was in heaven. She collected pine cones by the lake's edge, built elaborate fairy houses out of twigs and moss, and drew endless pictures of the three of them holding hands under a smiling sun. One afternoon, while Emma was napping on the porch swing, Jack and Ellie took a walk along the shore of the lake. The water was calm and clear, reflecting the deep blue of the autumn sky. They walked in a comfortable silence for a while, their hands brushing against each other until he finally took hers, lacing his fingers through hers. I meant what I said. Ellie, he said, his voice low. I'm not afraid of your world anymore. I'm just afraid of not having you in mine. She squeezed his hand, her eyes soft and serious. I'm selling the company. Jack. He stopped and turned to her, stunned. What? Why? Because it's not mine anymore, she said. It's my father's legacy. It's a machine I know how to run, but it's not my heart. My grandfather started with one small dealership and a love for honest work. He built it into an empire, but somewhere along the way, we lost the first part of that equation. I want to go back to that. I want to build something smaller, something that matters, something that has heart. What are you saying? He asked, his own heart pounding. She looked up at him, her gaze clear and unwavering. I'm saying I want to build it with you. I don't know anything about selling cars, Ellie. He chuckled. I know, she said. But you know about building things. You know about honesty and integrity and what it means to stand by your work. You're the heart. Jack, I just have the resources to give it a home. He stared at her, speechless. This woman who had every material thing in the world was offering to give it all up to build something new with him. A carpenter with a rusty truck and a heart full of hope. Are you sure? He whispered. Absolutely, she said. And I have an idea of where to start. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a blueprint, a design for a building. It wasn't a sleek glass dealership. It was a workshop, a community auto shop with a large garage, a classroom for teaching basic car maintenance, and a small attached apartment above it. On the top of the blueprint, in her elegant script, were the words, "The Miller Richardson Project, a place for honest work and second chances." Jack looked from the blueprint to her face, his eyes full of a love so deep it left no room for doubt. Okay, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Let's build it. The sale of Richardson Enterprises made headlines for weeks. The business world was stunned that Eleanor Richardson, the brilliant and unflappable CEO, would walk away from her family's empire at the height of her power. The tabloids spun wild theories: a nervous breakdown, a secret illness, a mysterious new love affair. They were partially right about the last one, but the story they told was a pale imitation of the truth. Ellie ignored it all. She let her lawyers and PR team handle the fallout while she focused on what mattered. She used a significant portion of the sale to establish a charitable foundation in her grandfather's name. dedicated to funding vocational training and small business grants across the country. The rest she invested in their new project, the Miller-Richardson Project. They found the perfect piece of land on the outskirts of Jackstown, a forgotten lot that had once been home to a rundown factory. They cleared the land themselves, working side by side on weekends, their hands calloused and their clothes covered in dirt. Jack drew up the final plans for the building, his carpenter's mind seeing every joist and beam with perfect clarity. Ellie handled the permits, the zoning laws, the endless paperwork that made his head spin. They were a team, their different skills fitting together like perfectly joined wood. As the foundation was poured and the walls went up, the town began to take notice. At first, people were skeptical. They'd read the headlines. They'd seen the pictures. But they started to see something else too. They saw Ellie in work boots and a dusty baseball cap, hauling lumber alongside Jack. They saw her laughing with Emma as they painted signs for the new shop. They saw a woman who wasn't afraid of hard work or getting her hands dirty. The Miller-Richardson Project became more than just a building. It became a symbol of hope in the small town. It was a place where kids could learn a trade, where people could get their cars fixed at a fair price by a man they trusted. It was a place built not on profit margins, but on community and respect. The grand opening was on a bright Saturday in spring. The whole town seemed to show up. There were no reporters, no velvet ropes, just a barbecue grill smoking in the parking lot and a bounce house for the kids. Emma, in a new dress with her name embroidered on the pocket, was the official tour guide, proudly showing everyone the new garage, the shiny tools, and the classroom with its brand new workbenches. Jack stood on the steps of the new building, a microphone in his hand, his voice steady and clear as he thanked everyone for coming. He looked out at the crowd of familiar faces, his friends, his neighbors, his community. Then his eyes found Ellie, standing beside him, her hand in his. "This place," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "isn't just about fixing cars. It's about building a community where everyone is respected, where honest work is valued, and where everyone gets a second chance to find their heart." He looked at Ellie, and his smile was the brightest it had ever been. "And this," he said, squeezing her hand, "is my heart." The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the celebration as the last of the burgers were eaten and the kids collapsed in a happy heap of exhaustion. Jack and Ellie stood on the porch of the small apartment they had built above the workshop, watching the scene unfold below. The Miller-Richardson Project was alive, humming with the sound of laughter and conversation. It was more than they had ever dreamed of. "This place is real, isn't it?" Ellie said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Yeah," he said, wrapping his arm around her. "It is." Emma ran up the stairs and threw her arms around both of their legs. "I love our new home," she said, her voice muffled against his jeans. "We love it too," Jack said, ruffling her hair. "You know what my favorite part is? What about it, kiddo?" The sign outside their new shop was simple, carved from a single piece of dark oak, the same kind as her grandfather's bookshelf. It read, "Miller-Richardson Auto, a place for honest work." Emma pointed toward it. "It has a heart in the wood," she said, tracing the shape of a heart that Jack had subtly carved right into the O of auto, a small, secret detail that only they would know. Jack smiled down at his daughter. "You're right, it does." Ellie knelt down and hugged her. "You know why, because that's where the best stories are kept," she said, her eyes meeting Jack's over Emma's head. "In the heart," and as the three of them stood there, bathed in the golden light of their new beginning, they knew their story wasn't a fairy tale. It was better. It was a story they had built themselves, with their own two hands, one of love, resilience, and the quiet courage it takes to build a new life from the broken pieces of the old one. It was a story with heart, and it was just getting started. The Miller-Richardson Project flourished in ways neither Jack nor Ellie could have predicted. What had begun as a simple auto shop and vocational training center had, over the course of 6 months, evolved into the beating heart of the community. On weekdays, the garage hummed with activity, local mechanics teaching teenagers how to change oil and diagnose engine problems. On weekends, The classroom hosted workshops on everything from basic woodworking to financial literacy. Every square inch of the place seemed alive with purpose. With possibility, Jack's once small carpentry business had expanded. He'd hired 2 apprentices, both former factory workers, who'd lost their jobs when the plant closed and took on restoration projects that demanded the kind of patience and care he specialized in. Ellie managed the financial side of things, securing grants for their vocational programs and developing partnerships with local businesses. They were a perfect team, each bringing strengths the other lacked. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was in Emma. The shy little girl who had once clutched Liberty the bear like a shield had blossomed. She'd become the unofficial mascot of the project, greeting visitors with confident handshakes and detailed explanations of how carburetors worked, knowledge gleaned from hours spent watching Jack and the mechanics. She had friends now, real ones who came over for sleepovers in the apartment above the shop, their laughter filtering down through the floorboards like music. Life had settled into a rhythm that felt both miraculous and entirely natural, as if the universe had finally corrected a long-standing error. But Jack knew better than most that even the strongest structures needed maintenance, needed constant attention to the small cracks that could, if ignored, eventually threaten the whole foundation. It was on a crisp autumn morning, almost exactly a year after their first meeting at the dealership, that the first hairline fracture appeared. Jack was in the garage, bent over the engine of Mrs. Abernathy's ancient Buick, when he heard the distinctive purr of a luxury car pulling into the lot. He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. Expecting to see one of Ellie's former business associates, they still came by occasionally, either out of curiosity or a genuine desire to support her new venture. Instead, he saw a sleek black Mercedes, and behind the wheel, a man whose face he recognized instantly from photographs in Ellie's office, her father, Robert Richardson. Jack's stomach tightened, in all their time together. Robert Richardson had remained a conspicuous absence. Ellie rarely spoke of him, and when she did, it was with a careful neutrality that told Jack everything he needed to know about their relationship. The sale of Richardson Enterprises had apparently been the final breach in an already strained father-daughter bond. "Keep an eye on that timing belt," Jack told his apprentice, Tony, trying to keep his voice casual. "I'll be back in a few." He walked across the lot, watching as Robert Richardson emerged from his car with the stiff, formal movements of a man uncomfortable in unfamiliar territory. He was tall, immaculately dressed in a tailored suit that looked wildly out of place against the backdrop of the modest auto shop. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his posture military straight, his eyes so like Ellie's in color but lacking their warmth, sweeping over the property with barely concealed judgment. "Mr. Richardson," Jack said, extending a hand that was still slightly stained with engine grease. "Jack Miller, welcome to our place." Robert looked at Jack's hand for a moment too long before shaking it, his grip firm but brief. "Mr. Miller, I've heard a great deal about you." "All good, I hope," Jack said with a smile that wasn't returned. "That would depend on one's perspective, wouldn't it?" Robert's gaze continued to roam, taking in the modest buildings, the hand-painted sign, the old cars in various states of repair. "Is my daughter here? She's in town picking up supplies. Should be back any minute." Jack gestured toward the small office attached to the garage. "Would you like to wait inside? I can get you some coffee." Robert hesitated, then nodded once. That would be acceptable. Jack led him to the office, acutely aware of the contrast between this small, utilitarian space and the plush corporate offices Robert was accustomed to. There were no mahogany desks or panoramic views here, just a simple oak desk built by Jack's own hands, a few mismatched chairs, and walls covered with children's drawings, most of them Emma's. "It's not exactly the Richardson Enterprises executive suite," Jack said, pouring coffee into a chipped mug with the Miller-Richardson logo, a stylized wrench crossed with a hammer. "No," Robert agreed, taking the mug but not drinking. "It most certainly is not." An uncomfortable silence settled between them. Jack wasn't sure what to say to this man who represented everything he wasn't: polished, privileged, powerful in the traditional sense. He was saved from having to make conversation by the sound of Ellie's truck pulling up outside. Through the window, Jack watched her hop out, her hair in a messy ponytail, wearing jeans and one of his old flannel shirts with the sleeves rolled up. She looked happy, relaxed, so different from the tense woman he'd first met in the dealership's showroom. His heart swelled with love for her, for the life they'd built together. Then he saw her freeze as she spotted her father's car. Her entire body tensed, and even from a distance, Jack could see the light go out of her eyes, replaced by a wary guardedness he hadn't seen in months. "Dad," she said as she entered the office, her voice carefully neutral. "This is a surprise." Robert set down his untouched coffee. "Eleanor, you're looking casual." Jack watched a familiar mask slip over Ellie's features, the CEO face. He called it the slight tightening around her eyes, the almost imperceptible straightening of her shoulders. It was the face she wore when she needed to protect herself. "I'll give you two some privacy," Jack said, moving toward the door. "No." Ellie's hand shot out, catching his. "Stay, please." The last word was soft, almost a plea. Jack nodded, moving to stand beside her, their shoulders touching. Robert's eyes flicked to their joined hands, then back to his daughter's face. "I had hoped to speak with you alone. Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of Jack," Ellie replied, her grip tightening on Jack's hand. Robert sighed, a sound heavy with disapproval. "Very well. I've come with a proposition. The board is concerned about the direction of the company since your departure. The stock has fallen 12%. Consumer confidence is down. The Richardson name means something in this industry. Eleanor, it has for 3 generations." And Ellie's voice was cool, but Jack could feel the tension radiating from her. "And they've asked me to approach you about returning in an advisory capacity, at least initially. Your institutional knowledge is valuable. Your relationships with key suppliers irreplaceable." He paused, his eyes sweeping the small office again. "Surely you must miss it sometimes. The challenge, the significance of the work." Jack felt a small tremor go through Ellie, so slight he doubted her father could perceive it, but he knew her body as well as his own now, could read her micro-expressions like a familiar blueprint. "I'm afraid I have to decline," Ellie said, her voice steady. "I've made commitments here. We're doing important work." Robert's mouth tightened. "Important work, Eleanor. You were running a $2 billion company. You were on the cover of Forbes. Now you're, what, a small-town mechanics assistant teaching dropouts how to change tires. This is hardly the legacy your grandfather envisioned when he built Richardson Enterprises from nothing." Jack felt his own anger rising, but Ellie's hand on his kept him silent. "Actually," she said, her voice gaining strength, "I think this is exactly the legacy Grandpa would have wanted. He didn't start with a billion-dollar company. He started with one dealership and a belief in honest work and fair dealing. He never forgot where he came from, even when the company grew. That's something you never understood." "Dad," Robert's face flushed, "I built that company into what it is today. I expanded it beyond your grandfather's wildest dreams." "Yes, you did. And in the process, you forgot what it was supposed to stand for. The customers became numbers. The employees became overhead. It was all about the bottom line." Ellie's voice softened. "I'm proud of what we're doing here. We're changing lives, one person at a time. If you could see it without your Wall Street glasses on, you might understand." "I understand perfectly," Robert said, standing. "I understand that you've thrown away everything we built for this." He gestured dismissively around him. "For him." His eyes fixed on Jack with undisguised disdain. Jack tensed, but Ellie's grip on his hand tightened again. "I haven't thrown anything away. Dad, I've just built something new, something that makes me happy, something with heart." Robert shook his head, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing a business card, which he placed on the desk. "When you come to your senses, call me. The offer won't stand forever." He left without another word, the door closing behind him with a soft click that somehow felt more final than if he'd slammed it. Ellie stood perfectly still for a long moment, staring at the closed door. Then she seemed to crumple, her shoulders sagging, her body leaning into Jack's as if she could no longer support her own weight. "Hey," he said softly, wrapping his arms around her. "You okay?" She buried her face in his chest, her words muffled against his shirt. "I knew he wouldn't understand. I guess I hoped that he'd see how happy you are, that he'd be proud of what you built here." She nodded, a small, vulnerable movement. Jack held her tighter, resting his chin on top of her head. "He might, someday, and if he doesn't, well, that's his loss. Because what you've built here, what we've built together, it's pretty amazing. And not just anyone could see the potential in an old, run-down lot and a guy with sawdust in his pockets." She looked up at him, a small smile breaking through the hurt. "A guy with sawdust in his pockets and a heart bigger than the whole state of Pennsylvania? See, amazing judge of character." He kissed her forehead, then her lips, gentle and reassuring. "Your grandfather would be proud. Ellie, I know he would." She nodded, straightening her shoulders, the steel returning to her spine. "I know he would too." She glanced at the business card her father had left, then deliberately turned away from it. "Come on, we've got work to do. Tony mentioned Mrs. Abernathy's timing belt was giving you trouble." And just like that, they returned to their day, to the rhythm of their shared life. But Jack couldn't help noticing that Ellie was quieter than usual that evening, her gaze occasionally drifting toward the window, toward some distant point only she could see. The visit from Robert Richardson acted like a pebble dropped in a still pond, its ripples spreading outward in ways neither Jack nor Ellie could have anticipated. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived, addressed to Ms. Eleanor Richardson, informal, typed script. Inside was an invitation to the annual Richardson Enterprises Charity Gala, a black tie event that raised millions for children's education initiatives. "You should go," Jack said as they sat on the porch of their apartment that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Emma was inside, already in her pajamas, reading a book about engines to Liberty the bear. Ellie looked at him, surprised. "Why would I want to go to that?" "Because it's for a good cause. Because deep down, I think you miss some aspects of that world. And because hiding out here, avoiding your old life completely, isn't the answer either." She was quiet for a moment, considering. "Would you come with me?" The question hung in the air, weighted with all the implications neither of them had fully confronted yet. They had built a beautiful bubble here, a world of their own making, but the real world with its class divisions, its prejudices, its tabloid headlines still existed beyond the boundaries of their small town. "Are you sure you want me there? Last time we were seen together in public, it didn't exactly go well." Ellie turned to face him fully, her eyes serious. "That's exactly why I want you there. I'm not ashamed of us. Jack, I never was. It was the world that tried to make me feel that way, that tried to make you feel that way. Maybe it's time we faced it head on our terms." Jack considered this. The thought of stepping into Ellie's former world, a world of wealth and privilege that had once seemed as foreign to him as the surface of the moon, filled him with a familiar dread. But there was something else too, something that felt like defiance, like pride. "Okay," he said finally, "but I don't own a tux." Her smile was worth every moment of discomfort he knew he'd face. "We can fix that," she said, leaning in to kiss him. "I know a guy." The night of the gala arrived with a sense of inevitability that Jack couldn't shake. He stood in front of the small mirror in their bedroom, adjusting the bow tie of the tuxedo Ellie had somehow procured for him. It fit perfectly, though he couldn't imagine how she'd manage that without him noticing. He barely recognized himself. The man in the mirror looked sophisticated, polished in a way Jack Miller had never aspired to be. He ran a hand through his hair, wondering if he was making a terrible mistake. "Stop fidgeting," Ellie said, appearing in the doorway. "You look incredibly handsome." The words died in his throat as he turned to look at her. She wore a simple black gown that clung to her curves before flowing gracefully to the floor. Her hair was swept up in an elegant twist, a few tendrils framing her face. Around her neck was a single strand of pearls, her grandmother's. She'd told him once. "You're beautiful," he managed finally. She smiled, crossing to straighten his bow tie. "And you're nervous. Don't be. These people, they're just people. Jack. Some good, some not so good, just like anywhere else. Rich people," he pointed out. "Yes, rich people, who put their pants on one leg at a time. Just like you do." She placed a hand on his chest, over his heart. "This is what matters, not the size of anyone's bank account or the address on their driver's license. You taught me that. Remember," he covered her hand with his own. "I remember." Emma burst into the room then, her eyes wide with wonder. "Wow, you guys look like you're in a movie." Jack knelt down, careful not to wrinkle his tux. "And you, Miss Emma, look like the most responsible young lady in all of Pennsylvania. Are you sure you're going to be okay with Mrs. Johnson?" Emma nodded solemnly. "I'll be fine. Daddy, Mrs. Johnson said we can make cookies and watch The Princess Bride, and Liberty will protect me." She held up the well-loved bear as evidence. "Well, with Liberty on the job, I know you'll be perfectly safe." He hugged her tightly, inhaling the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo, after dropping Emma off with their elderly neighbor, who had become something of a surrogate grandmother to her. Jack and Ellie began the drive to Philadelphia in Ellie's car, a modest but comfortable sedan that had replaced her luxury vehicles when they started the project. The gala was being held at the Richardson Hotel, a historic landmark in the heart of the city that had been in Ellie's family for generations. As they approached, Jack could see the building lit up like a beacon, its facade bathed in soft, golden light. A red carpet led from the street to the grand entrance, where photographers and a small group of society reporters were stationed. "Ready?" Ellie asked as the valet opened her door. Jack took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." They stepped onto the red carpet together, hand in hand. Jack could feel the exact moment when recognition rippled through the small crowd of photographers. There was a pause, then a flurry of flashes and shouted questions. "Miss Eleanor Richardson, is this your first public appearance with Mr. Miller? Eleanor, over here, are you two engaged? Mr. Miller, how does it feel to be dating one of the richest women in America?" Jack felt his jaw tighten, but Ellie's hand in his remained steady, grounding him. She smiled politely at the reporters but didn't stop to answer questions, guiding him smoothly into the hotel. The ballroom was a sea of designer gowns and custom tuxedos, of glittering jewelry and polished shoes. Conversations paused as they entered, heads turning, whispers starting. Jack felt like an exhibit in a museum, displayed for everyone's curiosity and judgment. Eleanor, a woman in her 60s, elegantly dressed in a midnight blue gown, approached them with outstretched hands. "How wonderful to see you. We've missed you at the foundation meetings." "Mrs. Harrington," Ellie said warmly, accepting the woman's embrace. "It's good to see you too. I'd like you to meet Jack Miller." "Jack, this is Margaret Harrington, the chairwoman of the Richardson Educational Foundation." Jack shook the woman's hand, surprised by the genuine warmth in her greeting. "A pleasure, Mr. Miller. I've heard so much about your vocational program. Such important work you're doing." Before Jack could respond, they were approached by more of Ellie's former colleagues and associates. Some were genuinely welcoming, others merely polite, and a few openly curious about the man who had supposedly lured Eleanor Richardson away from her empire. Jack answered their questions as honestly as he could, speaking passionately about the project when asked, and gradually, he felt some of his tension ease. They were at the bar, waiting for drinks, when a familiar voice cut through the ambient noise. "Well, well, if it isn't the happy couple, straight out of a Hallmark movie, aren't you?" Jack turned to see Brad Mitchell, the salesman from the dealership, the man who had started it all with his leak to the tabloids. He was dressed in an ill-fitting tuxedo, a drink already in his hand, his smile sharp and unfriendly. "Brad," Ellie acknowledged coolly, "I'm surprised to see you here. Oh, I'm full of surprises, just like you. Apparently, his gaze shifted to Jack, sizing him up. Nice tux. Miller, rental, or did the lady buy it for you? Jack felt a flash of the old anger, the old shame. But before he could respond, another voice joined the conversation. I believe that's enough. Mr. Mitchell. Robert Richardson stepped forward, his imposing presence immediately changing the dynamic. Brad straightened, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. Mr. Richardson, sir, I was just leaving, I think. Robert's tone left no room for argument. Now, Brad hesitated, then set his glass down on the bar with a small, defeated nod. Yes, sir. He shot one last glare at Jack before disappearing into the crowd. An awkward silence descended. Robert turned to his daughter, his expression unreadable. Eleanor. Dad. Ellie's voice was cautious. Thank you for that. Robert nodded, then surprised them both by extending a hand to Jack. Mr. Miller, I believe I owe you an apology for my behavior when we last met. It was unwarranted. Jack shook the offered hand, too stunned to do anything else. Thank you, sir. I've been doing some research on your project, Robert continued, addressing them both now. Your vocational program has an impressive success rate. 3 of your graduates have already secured full-time positions in reputable garages. 4, actually, Ellie corrected, a hint of pride in her voice. Tony just got hired at Peterson's last week. 4, then, even more impressive. Robert seemed to be struggling with something, his usual composure slightly fractured. I've also been thinking about what you said, Eleanor, about your grandfather, about what he would have wanted. Ellie's hand found Jack's again, squeezing tightly. I visited his grave last week, Robert continued. I haven't been in years. I'm ashamed to say, and I remembered something he told me once, when I was first starting in the business. He said, the measure of success isn't how high you climb, but how many people you bring with you. I'm afraid I lost sight of that somewhere along the way. Dad, Ellie's voice was soft, touched. I'm not saying I fully understand your choices, Robert added quickly, but I respect them, and I'm proud of what you're building. It has, what was the word you used, heart? The tension that had been building in Jack's chest since they'd arrived at the gala suddenly eased. He watched as Ellie stepped forward to embrace her father. A tentative reconciliation that felt like the closing of another circle, the healing of another wound. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of introductions, dancing, and surprisingly genuine conversations. Jack found himself explaining the basics of engine repair to a curious investment banker, discussing apprenticeship programs with a state senator, and even receiving a few business cards from potential donors interested in expanding their vocational training initiative. By the time they left, the night air cool on their heated skin, Jack felt a strange sense of victory. Not because he had conquered Ellie's world, or because he had proven himself to her father, but because he had faced his own fears and found them less substantial than he'd imagined. That wasn't so bad, was it? Ellie asked as they drove home, the city lights fading behind them. Jack laughed, loosening his bow tie. It had its moments, your father's apology being one of the more surprising ones. Ellie smiled, her eyes on the road. He's a complicated man, stubborn, set in his ways, but not incapable of growth. Sounds like someone else I know. I have no idea what you're talking about, Jack said with mock innocence, making her laugh. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the hum of the road beneath them, the stars bright overhead. Jack found himself thinking about the journey that had brought them here from a chance encounter in a dealership to this moment. Driving home from a society gala where they had stood tall together, unashamed and unafraid. What are you thinking about? Ellie asked, glancing over at him. I'm thinking about stories, he said slowly, about how we all have these ideas about how our lives are supposed to go. These narratives we build for ourselves, and then life throws you a curveball like a CEO pretending to be a new employee, or a single dad trying to fix a headlight, and suddenly the story changes. And is that a good thing? The story changing? He reached across the console to take her hand. In our case, I'd say it's the best thing that ever happened. The following Saturday dawned clear and warm. A perfect late spring day. Jack was up early, tinkering with an old wooden rowboat he'd found at a yard sale and had been restoring for Emma. They'd promised to take her out on Silver Pine Lake once it was finished, a promise that had led to weeks of excited anticipation. He was sanding the gunnels when he heard the familiar sound of Ellie's footsteps on the gravel path. She appeared in the doorway of his workshop, holding 2 mugs of coffee, her hair still slightly mussed from sleep, wearing one of his old t-shirts and a pair of jeans. "Morning," she said, handing him a mug. "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," he admitted, taking a grateful sip. "Too much on my mind." She perched on the edge of his workbench, watching him. "Care to share?" Jack set down his coffee and the sandpaper, wiping his hands on his jeans. "I've been thinking about the future. About us." "Oh." Her voice was casual, but he could see the alertness in her eyes, the slight tension in her shoulders. He moved to stand in front of her, taking both her hands in his. "When I met you, I was just trying to survive, to keep my head above water, to give Emma some kind of stability. I wasn't looking for anything more than that. I certainly wasn't looking for you." A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. "And I wasn't looking for a stubbornly proud carpenter with sawdust in his pockets. But here we are," he continued, his thumbs tracing small circles on the backs of her hands. "And the thing is, Ellie, I can't imagine a future without you in it. You and me and Emma, we're a family now. A real one. And I want to make that official. If you'll have me." Her eyes widened as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box, handcrafted from the same dark oak as her grandfather's bookshelf. "I'm not offering you wealth or status or anything like that," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple ring with a small diamond set in a band of polished wood. "All I've got is my hands, my heart, and a promise to build a life with you, one day at a time." Tears welled in her eyes as she looked from the ring to his face. "Jack." "Eleanor Richardson," he said, his voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, and then louder. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, the wood warm against her skin. She threw her arms around his neck, kissing him deeply, joyfully, until they were both breathless. When they finally broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I love you, Jack Miller." "I love you too, Ellie Richardson, soon to be Ellie Miller, if that's what you want." She smiled, her eyes shining. "I think I'd like to be Ellie Richardson Miller. A new name for a new story." A small gasp from the doorway made them both turn. Emma stood there, Liberty clutched to her chest, her eyes wide with wonder. "Are you guys getting married?" she asked, her voice a mix of hope and disbelief. Jack nodded, opening his arm to her. "We are, kiddo, if that's okay with you." Emma launched herself at them with a squeal of delight, wrapping her arms around both their waists. "Does this mean Ellie's going to be my mom now? For real?" Jack and Ellie exchanged a glance over the top of Emma's head, a look full of love and promise and shared understanding. "If you want me to be," Ellie said softly, stroking Emma's hair. "I do." Emma looked up at them both, her face radiant with happiness. "And Liberty does too. He told me." Jack laughed, scooping his daughter up into his arms. "Well, if Liberty approves, then it must be meant to be." The 3 of them, soon to be officially a family, stood in the workshop, surrounded by the tools of Jack's trade. The smell of sawdust and fresh coffee in the air, sunlight streaming through the windows, painting everything in a golden glow. It was a perfect moment, a snapshot of joy that Jack knew he would carry with him for the rest of his life. "So," Emma said, her practical nature reasserting itself, "when's the wedding? And can I be the flower girl? And can we have chocolate cake and—" "Whoa, slow down there, kiddo." Jack laughed. "We've got plenty of time to figure all that out." "Actually," Ellie said with a mysterious smile, "I have an idea about that." They were married on a perfect summer day at Silver Pine Lake, with the cottage as a backdrop and the water sparkling in the afternoon sun. It was a small ceremony, intimate and personal in a way that suited them both. Emma, resplendent in a sky blue dress, the exact color of Jack's truck, scattered wildflower petals down an aisle of river stones. Jack stood at the makeshift altar, a simple wooden arch he had built himself. Entwined with local flowers, wearing a suit that was comfortable rather than formal, his work boots polished to a shine because, as he told Ellie, some things are non-negotiable. When Ellie appeared at the end of the stone path, a vision in a simple white dress, carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. Jack felt his heart stop and then restart with a joyous leap. She walked toward him alone, her father having offered to give her away, but Ellie gently declining. "This is a choice I'm making for myself," she had told him, and to his credit, Robert had understood. Their vows were simple, honest, written in their own words. Jack promised to build a life of integrity and love, to stand by her side through whatever storms might come. Ellie promised to honor the man he was, to never try to change him, but to grow with him, to face the world together as equals. When they exchanged rings, hers, the one he had crafted, his a matching band of the same wood and metal, there wasn't a dry eye among the small gathering of friends and community members who had come to witness their union. The reception was held on the lawn of the cottage, tables set up under strands of twinkling lights, a local band playing a mix of classics and modern tunes. There was dancing and laughter, good food and better company. Robert Richardson, to everyone's surprise, gave a toast that was both heartfelt and humble, acknowledging his initial reservations and celebrating the love that had proven him wrong. As the evening drew to a close, Jack and Ellie slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand down to the lake's edge. The rowboat, now fully restored and gleaming with fresh paint, was tied to a small dock, bobbing gently in the water. "Happy?" Jack asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind, both of them gazing out at the moonlight reflecting on the still water. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning back against him. "You know, when I was a little girl, my grandfather used to tell me that the best things in life can't be bought. They have to be built, with patience and care and love. I didn't really understand what he meant until I met you." Jack tightened his arms around her, resting his chin on top of her head. "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man. I wish I could have met him." "Me too. He would have loved you." She turned in his arms to face him. "But in a way, he did meet you, through his bookshelf. And you honored his craftsmanship by restoring it, the same way you've helped me restore the values he believed in." "Speaking of building things," Jack said, nodding toward the rowboat, "what do you say we take that out for a moonlight cruise? Just the two of us?" Ellie smiled, her eyes reflecting the stars above. "I'd say that sounds like the perfect beginning to our next chapter." They climbed into the boat, Jack rowing with strong, sure strokes, Ellie trailing her fingers in the cool water. They drifted to the center of the lake, surrounded by the quiet sounds of the night, the gentle lapping of water against wood, the distant chorus of crickets, the soft whisper of a breeze through the pines. There, floating between sky and water. Jack set the oars aside and took his wife's hands in his. "You know," he said softly, "when I first met you, I thought you were just another rich person looking down on my old truck, my old life. And I thought you were just another proud man too stubborn to accept help." She replied with a gentle smile. "We were both wrong, and both right. In a way," she squeezed his hands, "you are proud and stubborn, and I did come from a world of privilege. But we saw past all that, to who we really are." "To the heart of the story," Jack said, remembering the note she had sent him, the photograph of his truck, the words that had brought him back to her. "To the heart," she agreed, leaning forward to kiss him under a canopy of stars, their reflection in the still water below creating the illusion of a couple suspended in an infinite moment, between the past and future, between heaven and earth, back at the cottage. The celebration continued. Emma danced with Liberty, the bear clutched to her chest, her eyes heavy with sleep, but her heart too full of joy to stop. The guests mingled and laughed. The community they had built together, celebrating the union that had, in many ways, made it all possible, and at the center of it all, just visible from the shore. A small boat drifted in the moonlight, carrying two people who had found in each other not just love, but recognition. Not just partnership, but completion. They had taken the broken pieces of their separate lives and built something new. Something strong, something with heart. It wasn't a fairy tale ending, because their story wasn't ending at all. It was continuing, evolving, building day by day, moment by moment, like a house being constructed beam by beam, or a community growing person by person, or a love deepening breath by breath. It was a story still being written, still being lived, still being built by hand, with care, with purpose. A story with heart. Their story, just beginning.